why the heck are you in Athens, and what do you do otherwise?
Why am I in Athens? Because you asked me to come. But yeah, quickly, I'm Ben. I'm one of the founders of Marble. We're a startup studio. We build hard tech companies in climate across energy, like making cheap electrons, distributing cheap electrons, rebuilding industry to make them more efficient, and resilience, climate adaptation. And I'm here to understand how we make Europe great again, I guess.
Sam, do you want to go?
So thank you all for hosting today. So I run a fund called Entropy Industrial Capital. We're a pre-seed focused deep tech fund. We tend to invest in very technical founders who are building technologies for the physical world. So far, that's been a lot in space, robotics, manufacturing, and national security. I started the fund nearly 3 years ago now with the view that the next 10 to 20 years was going to be defined by the intersection of technology and geopolitics. And hopefully we're going to talk about some of those themes today.
Devika, do you want to go?
Sure. I'm Devika. I'm the co-founder of Wilbe. We invest in scientists. We're a venture fund and platform that helps great researchers start great companies from day zero. We do that primarily through our platform that provides access to know-how, community, capital, and physical lab space to about nearly 1,200 researchers every year, and then we get to partner with a few that are pursuing their wildest dreams and ambitions outside of academia and R&D labs. So that's across the space of everything deep tech, I'd say everything critical.
Cool. And then Hampus, I'm at a fund called Pilberdot. We do also super early stage, slightly later than especially the two that are the inception stage. And essentially the way we look at it is that we like doing stuff that really matters and upgrade the operative system of everything around us and not just build yet another game or a payment gateway, but figuring out how to build houses and how to transport goods and people and solve those problems that your grandma had and your kids will have, like the eternal problems. And I think that it's interesting also to talk about the situation we're in, because I would say I think we've all been in the company building and investing space for quite a while. And I think it's interesting to think about the fact that there were a long period when startups were just starting stuff that we could just start. It wasn't that hard to find a problem that was not digitalized. And I think what's interesting is that now I find at least that startups have an opportunity to solve problems that are gnarlier and messier or science or capex heavy or very deep tech or something, that thanks to all of these tools. And I think that especially the three of you are really looking at those founders. What do you think is this due to like a geopolitical situation of stress in certain industries? Do you think it's an enablement thanks to technology? Do you think founders are looking at different problems? Why are founders going out and solving like harder problems than when they can just build a new dating app for a new niche or another food tech app? Because there are a lot of easy ways to compete. Yeah. But why are people building meaningful stuff?
I can start. When I started my career in technology investing, which is a decade ago now, like most of the brilliant minds, so people who'd gone to Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, were focused a lot on some engineering roles, which were, to paraphrase, kind of delivering burgers quicker to someone, which is totally fine in that, it is proven to be a good business. And at least then, when I would talk about deep tech investing, so this is investing in low-level technologies, often in hardware, often with some really kind of gnarly problems in the physical world. Deep tech was sort of a dirty word, and it usually meant sort of industries or technologies which are too complicated for most people to understand and probably too complicated for most investors to take a serious interest in. I think for a number of reasons as of today in Europe, but in the US as well, when you talk about deep tech, and it is an interchangeable word, it's actually become a symbol of ambition for a lot of people. So, how can we build these really incredible technologies that not only sort of within the sphere of the internet, but are more so having an impact on the physical world that we live in, on energy systems, on transportation systems, on flights, on aerospace, etc. The view that I have, and going back to your original question, is on how we got to this point. my thesis is, and this is kind of just how I view the world, is that we, as Europeans, have been living in, really multiple decades of relative peace, and that peace has been sort of underpinned by a few constraints, a few parameters, which is one, global trade, which has been to some extent increasing globalization and controlled by the US. We had a security umbrella, which effectively meant that we as Europeans could invest really heavily, not in security, but in things like the social contract, et cetera. And that has been incredibly valuable and prosperous to us. I think in the last 2 years with, let's say, some of the new political players abroad, that has changed. And I think J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference was probably a line in the sand for a lot of European leaders who've thought to themselves, we've gone from a world where we have, generally relatively good relations internationally, and certainly with the US, to a world where we think to ourselves, like, excuse my French, oh shit, we actually need to build leverage and security and technologies to be national, because we can no longer depend in the same extent that we used to on a lot of those players. So I think that in the last few years has been sort of a fire that has been lit, and there's been a sort of, I think, continent-wide recognition of this fact that we need to invest in these technologies, and a lot of builders who have previously been focused on sort of adjacencies are now focused on these deep tech technologies. So anyway, that's how I view it.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting to think about just the last years of shocks, right? I mean, it's hard to know when it started, right? But I would just say, like, Russia-Ukraine obviously was a big shakeup for Europe. And then, of course, when Trump became president, that was another shakeup. And then Strait of Hormuz. I think that it's, like, very clear that we can't just rely on others to solve the problem. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, Ben, you were...
Yeah, no, I mean, totally agree with your point. I think also, like, the origin of the tech industry and, like, investing and so on was initially to really invest in hard technologies, like the roots of Silicon Valley was hardware, semiconductors, defense, biotech, and so on. I guess we forgot that for some time because at some point there was, the internet and e-commerce and software, and it became so huge. There was so many opportunities that the landscape shifted there. But I think we're coming back to hardware and deep tech because I think also, like, it's becoming more codified and understood how to launch these companies. And so we see more and more scientists, engineers, technical founders outside of software launching more companies. They have more role models, more examples, more program, more education. I think that's one thing. And maybe another thing is even experienced founders coming from software and other industries who want to have a high impact today. They know, like, the amount of high impact opportunities in software is quite limited. There's a few. Maybe with AI it's changing. But so they're looking at all these big problems that Sam went through, and they're like, yeah, I want really to have an impact on the world, and the physical world is where I can have that today, and that's what drives them.
Yeah.
I was going to add that I think for the reasons Sam mentioned, where we actually have, we don't even have a choice. I think the only thing we can do is to invest in all the critical industries in Europe, not just as a venture ecosystem, but as an entire ecosystem across different stakeholders. I remember when we were helping the Proxima Fusion team get off the ground in late 2022, early 2023, Germany was shutting down its nuclear fission plants. And so that's not very long ago. That's just about 3 years ago. We were living in such a different environment. And then suddenly the tide shifted that now we have RWE, which is one of the largest utilities in Germany, leasing a decommissioned fission plant so that we can actually build a fusion reactor out there, which means that I think it's a huge sign, because we not only have private capital, but we also have state capital that's coming in to build in areas that, if you like, we almost need to leapfrog, because we're already quite behind the US and China.
Yeah. No, but I think there's an interesting thing about that exact thing, that on one end we have the pressure, on one end it's ambitious people want to solve hard, interesting stuff. So I think those two forces are really good. I think the thing that I'm mostly confused about is that when I look at what's happening in the world, I feel super stressed. I feel like we can do so many things, but then when I talk to a lot of government official, larger companies, I feel like, oh, they're pretty chill. And I wonder if we're having that delay effect in society, whereas like we see it with the founders. Like we're seeing founders and VCs talk about, okay, nuclear, how do we solve it? Or energy, or how do we do this? Whereas like the big companies seems to be solved, almost, like I'm exaggerating a bit. And I think I wonder if like, I mean the previous panel, they mentioned like Europe is really good for tourism and like good schools. And I wonder if that mentality is like the pervasive one that makes us feel that why are people not doing more meaningful stuff? Because somehow the crisis and opportunity hasn't reached everyone. But I'm not sure. How do you feel like, especially Ben and Devika, who are like the super early stage, like company creation, do you feel like Gen AI, and sorry to bring it, there can't be a panel without mentioning the word AI, I'm really sorry. But do you feel that has affected your type of founders that are like, way more researchers or way more hardware centric? Because those are not the obvious like LLM, ChatGPT problems.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, our position is like really particular because we really come at the beginning of company building. We select the areas and problems we like, and then we source the individuals who could be great founders to build in that space. So we're kind of biased. Like when you want to build something in geothermal, for example, we're looking at everyone amazing that wants to build in geothermal specifically, not who might consider doing that or an NLM. That said, I think there's a lot of interesting AI adjacent areas we are interested in. So there's a lot of opportunities to use AI, robotics, automation to make manufacturing industries more efficient, less wasteful, and so on. And there's also a lot of things to do to make the whole electro-industrial stack and compute stack like more efficient, better chips, better data centers, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a few things we're looking at there. But yeah, I mean, generally we look for a problem we like, and then we look for the founders who are really driven for that problem. So we don't really have that trade-off.
No.
Yeah, strangely, Hampus, we don't see that. If anything, we're finding that the momentum we're seeing across AI and all the tooling that's now possible is, if anything, improving the work of all our founders. And that's just because all the founders are deeply technical. They're all scientists or engineers that have had some form of, either they've had a novel breakthrough or they've been working on something for a decade, and they suddenly realize, okay, now is the time, and that now is very much an outcome of the surrounding forces that we're seeing.
Do you think one problem we have in Europe is that we're missing like a El Segundo? Like we're missing an area where people go and prototype crazy shit. I'm thinking maybe this is more like a Sam question, who likes El Segundo maybe more than the rest of us.
I try and veer off sort of comparisons to the US. I do think there is definitely some issues in Europe around density. I mean, there are so many strong technical hubs for specifically the types of industries that I like, which are a lot in hardware and robotics. I can think of Oxford, Cambridge, TU Delft, ETH Zurich, NTNU as really strong hubs for all of those things, but they're actually really disparate. So would they be better if they were sort of all joined together? Absolutely. I think if we were to make the comparison to the US, we can't forget that the US has equivalents that are equivalently far away from
most of it.
CMU to Caltech to even Columbia Engineering, Stanford, Berkeley, etc. So I do think there are some issues around talent density. I think more so, sort of maybe more importantly than talent density, is a lot of the countries to some extent are in conflict with one another. And I don't mean directly, but just in terms of what packages they provide to researchers and technical talent that are coming out of those universities, even the sort of local legislation in terms of setting up a company, structuring options is very, very disparate and very, very different across the continent. I still believe the UK is the best place to get set up. So there are numerous issues. I think one issue, going to your initial point, you sort of talked about culture. I think there is the culture of sort of building these really difficult companies, I think has really increased manifestly in the last couple of years in Europe, and the ambition levels has just gone up an order of magnitude from where we were before. And I think that is not only within the founders themselves. I think a lot of the founders have always had that ambition, but have been roadblocked by multiple things. I think as investors, and maybe this is an admission, we've had a big role in that. Not a super tangible role, but I think to some extent early stage funding and company creation is quite symbiotic, and people tend to solve for things that they feel that they can get funding for, both initially and at the later stages. And I think the venture industry has actually really been addicted to sort of these perceived to be low dilution, scalable models, be it food delivery or internet services, etc. And for a lot of investors, they've made a lot of money doing that, and their whole mental model on how to succeed is framed around these types of software native companies.
Yeah.
And I totally get that. I'd make a few arguments. One, if you look at the data, they're no less capital intensive than hardware companies.
No.
Deep tech companies and software companies kind of have an inverse problem. So software companies are really easy to get off the ground, but actually really expensive to scale, because at some point you start butting into lots of competition, and the barriers to that competition, depending on what you do, can often be very, very low. Whereas hardware is the opposite. Like, it's really hard to get started because you need typically lots of things, from engineers to physical sites to supply chains to bunch of things. But then at scale, you can actually build real defensibility and real moats. And I think that has actually been a really obvious insight for a long time. It's just people have not been focused on that.
No.
And I think that now that we're seeing a number of success cases, maybe driven by AI, the most valuable company on the planet is NVIDIA, right? And Anthropic is a company that, like, one of their key edges is the ability to stand up data centers, or at least buy capacity and run inference. So I think we've started to see the mindset shift, unfortunately probably too slowly from a lot of investors in Europe and the US. But thankfully it has come, and it has opened kind of the aperture of what people are willing to fund and the ambition level. So I think, I suspect when I started my fund 3 years ago, I said to a lot of people that deep tech in 5 to 6 years' time would be viewed as generalist investing, and everyone kind of thought I was insane. And maybe that is, who knows, TBD. But I think if we look forward to the next 6, 10, 20 years, I think we will see sort of the majority of early stage venture capital being put towards these really ambitious, hard tech companies. I think statistically in the last 10 years, we've, I think, gone 3 or 4x where we are, and it's about 40% of European funding. But it continues to trend up, and I think it will be a majority at some point.
But I think it's as Ben said, Cisco and those companies, there weren't software companies around. I always, when I talk to some of our founders, I try to explain to them if they're building a sifting for gold company, which is one that it's complicated, you don't know if there's gold in the river. If there's gold, everything's solved. And then most companies that VCs really like are the Lovables and whatever, that are the running with an egg on a spoon companies. That are everything is very fragile, everybody loves you because just run, but everybody's sitting there going but it's that exact thing. When you have a deep tech company, you're just saying, you can just go away. If we have gold, you're going to love me then. And it's such an interesting dichotomy that so many VCs just want that fragile company. They really want that the food deliveries were the same. I remember meeting what's his name, Christian, what's his last name, who was the CTO for Deliveroo. And Delivery Hero. And I remember thinking they probably have 10, 20 developers. And they had thousands of developers. I was like, what? You're just delivering food. But you realize, when you scale, that problem becomes very expensive.
Yeah.
So yeah. What are your thoughts? Final thoughts. We have another lovely 10 minutes. If we want founders to start something that we would like to find and fund, what are things that you fall in love with? Ben, you have actually areas that you're sourcing founders in.
Yeah, that's why I'm curious first to hear what
Okay, exactly.
I would like to definitely see a lot more in the semiconductor space. I think we're sadly not anywhere in the AI frontier lab space in Europe, but AI can't exist without chips. So and there's so much to be done there, from traditional semiconductor architectures to new forms like photonics and other areas. We're pretty excited about photonics, if I may say so. So if anyone's building in that space, feel free to come. And I think that's one area where it's probably one of the dire sovereign needs for Europe as a whole, and where we probably need a lot of support going into, again, I'll use the same word, leapfrogging innovation, because we're pretty far behind in that infrastructure layer. I usually say the opposite, which is we have too much state funding at the earliest stages of science commercialization in Europe, which I still think is true across European countries. But in certain areas like the semiconducting space, I feel we could afford more sovereign efforts, like the UK started sovereign AI, and there are other efforts at play as well. We could be doing more to create companies at that space and getting them well-funded really, really fast.
Sam or Steph, what's on your shopping list?
I think, to start, I think top-down, there's a couple of things that I'd absolutely love to see. One, decrease in regulation and maybe some specific sandboxes for people to build and test things. So there's a story in the UK, which was told to me very recently, which is there's a regiment, so an army regiment in the center of London that is predominantly tasked with flying drones and protecting the king and queen. They actually can't test drones because it's in the center of London. So they're the drone unit, they can't test drones, and that's just because of regulation. In the UK, we did very well, I guess, 10 or 15 years ago with this regulatory fintech sandbox that created lots of successful companies from Monzo and Revolut, which said, we will not expose you to the regulation of the financial authority, but you can build and test things and then hopefully get to some scale. So I'd love to see similar in different industries. I'd also love to see governments become a buyer of technology locally. So like in the UK NHS, Health Service and military bought Palantir, which has become like this huge issue. They're like, hold on, why was no one else in this tender? And that creates a dependency on sort of an external state that we don't like. So I'd love them to be a buyer of semiconductors, of software, of hardware, of energy systems, etc. I'd love to see people building in space. So we have numerous space investments. None of them are in Europe, unfortunately, just because as of yet, there's not been a huge amount of focus both on launch and applications. I think SpaceX launched 22 times more than the entirety of European launch last year. And that's just one private company. That's obviously not the entirety of the market. So we have some issues there. There are things that are happening to solve that launch problem, but I think there's probably the ability for a European company to kind of be the Rolls-Royce for space. We have amazing aerospace talent in France, in the UK, in Germany, and I'd love that talent to be focused on those spaces. I'd also love to invest more in robotics, so really ambitious robotics, whether it's maritime, whether it's space-based, whether it's vision-based systems and computer vision localization, as opposed to kind of more incremental things happening in warehouse automation. So yeah, if you're building any of those, please hit me up.
Yeah, there's a big opportunity that just opened in the space communications too, like the 2 gigahertz bandwidth that the EU just reopened because it was a monopoly of 2 American companies, and they carved out a third of the frequency for a new entrance to come. So it's an interesting one to follow. And one thing I'm really, really obsessed with is like how can we make energy cheap again? Because it's like one of the mother of all issues. Electricity, energy is generally like way more expensive here than it is in the US. So anything about making very, very cheap electrons, ways to down cost nuclear, ways to scale geothermal power, ways to fix the grid. I think there are interesting things also that are grid adjacent. So I'm curious, for example, whether there's like novel types of microgrid platforms or technologies where you could make, off-grid data centers or off-grid industries that will not require to interconnect or will not have to support the grid fees, for example. And there's another grid-adjacent problem, like for example, where I think we're going to have much more very, very cheap solar power that's available only 20% of the time. Are there alternatives to storing that solar electricity? Like, can you directly use the excess solar power instead of curtailing it and basically feeding a productive process that uses that energy only during 20%, so super, super low capex. You use almost free electricity and you make a valuable industrial commodity and you ship it where it's going to be used. So is there like new ways to use excess solar power? That would be something I'd be really excited if someone has an idea on that.
Because that's also, I think, on energy, it's so strange, because when people are excited about nuclear and fusion, those are great, but those are fairly long timelines. And I think the weird thing is that the cheapest electron to buy is the one that is not created. It's already in the grid. It's already created. Like, we're creating quite a lot of electrons. We're just throwing them away, and like they're in the wrong place. So there are a lot of stuff. Sorry, Devika, I saw you're like, no, you're gonna like.
Yeah. I was, because it was a wish list.
Yeah,
not
you
just
get more.
what we want to build.
No, you get more.
This is a more tangential wish list item. Is that after spending time with so many researchers, now I think we have 1,600 on the platform. All that are, not everyone's building a company, but they all kind of come with the desire to explore building a company and working on fascinating things. I think one of the things that we often find is a limitation, ultimately to mindset, but it comes from structural gaps in the system, is this over-reliance on grant funding for validation versus going out and speaking to customers and figuring out, is there a real business to be built? And therefore, because of that, a lot of things end up never seeing the light of day because the only form of validation has been what scientists are used to, which is grants. So I think a counter kind of narrative to how do we kind of, I think grants are great for pursuing fundamental research and big moonshots while they're still in the lab phase. But once you're entering the commercialization phase, and even if it's not ready for venture capital, how do we kind of spark private philanthropists backing great science, great engineering moonshots even before they're venture ready? Much like, again, I will draw a comparison here, but much like how we've seen in the US with the Carnegies or the Eric Schmidts of the world kind of sparking a lot of work in the science and STEM innovation space. So,
like Sweden essentially is a country that's run by that mafia. Like, it's like the
Exactly.
Wallenberg people are. It's like if you go into a Swedish large company, you always find Wallenberg behind the stage. It's like insane. It's like, it's incredible. Their motto is to act without being seen. And boy, they're good at it. It's
and
like,
you have professor's privilege, which means there's the universities take no equity in the companies coming out of
yeah, but it's
Swedish
also other
universities.
stuff. Like, for example, Sweden has this thing called Studsvik, which is like the nuclear waste management reactor, which is a private company. And it's one space in Sweden where you're allowed to do almost anything with nuclear, because, I mean, come on, it's nuclear waste, it's really messy. It's a private company, a Swiss family office with Wallenberg involved, bought 10% of that company to create like a crazy innovation zone on nuclear. Because they have all the permits, they have everything, it's just, and it's a public company. So the cool thing is, like, there are things we can do. Like, we can play with stuff, we can create urgent buyers, we can do these things. And I think that the message I'm trying to say, and I think we're trying to say, is that if you're ambitious and if you have wild ideas and crazy ideas and you want to solve hard and messy problems, these are the people you should talk to. If you want to build a fun game, there are other VCs you want to talk to. So, thank you very much. Thanks for joining me on stage and in Warm Up.
Thank you.